everybody. It's Josh Rubin here with the latest edition of the Rubin Special live from New York City. We're joined by my good friend Chase Costello out in Seattle, Bellevue, Washington. Chase is just getting his tripod set up because we're doing live on Facebook and Instagram just for your viewing pleasure. Chase, how you doing out there in Seattle?
I'm good, Josh. Thank you so much for getting me on here, but I'm having a little technical difficulties with my tripod. But other than that, I'm fantastic.
Awesome. Well, you know, Chase, we've been operating on a little bit of a vacuum here in New York City. People don't know whether the market is up, down, sideways, or what. We are, doing business slowly but surely, starting to come out of the woodwork. We're seeing inquiries online on our listings climb a little bit. We're seeing lots of people come out of the caves and trying to list their homes. We're doing photography. We're doing floor plans. But I'll tell you, rumor is that when we actually try to do these things, sometimes we get caught. And we heard of a colleague of ours out on Long Island who was just doing photography the other day, not even showing to a prospective buyer, not meeting with a prospective seller. They got the listing. They're doing photography. They're keeping social distancing. They have the photographer in the house. The agent is waiting outside in the car. The neighbor sees what they deem to be suspicious activity at the house. So what do? A good neighbor. What do? They call the police and say, I see suspicious activity at my neighbor's house. Can you check on them and go and investigate? The police go and investigate. They find that the real estate agent is doing what they do, and they levied a fine on the real estate agent of $10,000.
Wow.
$10,000. And there's rumor that they want to revoke the agent's license. It's mind-blowing because, Andrew Cuomo, the governor, has deemed us to be essential, right? So he said, yes, you're essential. Yes, you can market homes. Yes, you can show homes, but it has to be done virtually, right? So it can't be done in person. So, what do we do?
Right. Yeah, that's a tough situation. Fortunately or unfortunately, I don't know how you want to look at it. In Washington State, we are considered essential, so we can still show properties. We have not heard of anybody getting fined that heavily for not staying within the restricted boundaries or guidelines. Our rules here in the state is we can show properties, but we have to, they've got to be one at a time. So if you're showing a family, well, two people can be in, but one has to obviously be an agent. So it's like you're going in, touring, coming out, dropping off, picking up the next person, going in. And you have to block out increments of 30 minutes time slots. So it's actually kind of challenging to get into homes because they're booking up once they come on the market. But that sucks for getting a $10,000 fine for doing what that agent did.
Yeah. So Chase, are you using showing time, or how are you setting it up? Is it booked by the time slot in showing time? How does it work?
Yeah, it is. So what we do is, and I've never used showing time until this started to happen. And what we do is, you just go into the app and then request it. And typically, if a buyer of mine or one of my agents says, hey, I want to see it at 10 o'clock, we have to say, well, we got to even see if it's available at 10 o'clock. And you just go in and they give you only increments. Some showings will only give you increments of 15 minutes. You're lucky if you get one for 30 minutes. I went and showed a couple houses to a relocation buyer that's moving out here. And it was a really cool house in Queen Anne, Seattle. And there was no showings for Saturday or Sunday. Luckily, I knew the listing agent. Yeah, I mean, it's just like
it was all booked up in showing time already. Nothing you could do but rely on your relationship with the listing agent and say, hey, Mary, I see your new listing. Really want to get in there with this buyer, but I can't do it through showing time. Is there any chance you could work it out?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, luckily the house has been vacant, and we're seeing more and more homes that we see on the market are I would say 80% of them are vacant. So we can kind of get outside those boundaries.
Right. And so I know that, Washington State, specifically, I believe it was Kirkland, was one of the first hotspots back in, early March, late February. And, it started to spread there. So what was the immediate impact, and how did people actually, adapt to that situation?
Yeah. It was actually really scary and shocking because I don't think people really knew what was going to happen and how fast this was going to spread. In that nursing home is only 15 minutes away from my house. And having a family, you worry of like, great, how fast is this going to get to my house? Luckily, they were able to somewhat quarantine that for the time. And then, obviously you guys know what happened. You guys were hit heavily hard. It was a shock. I mean, it was more of like, what do we do? What's going to happen? What's this landscape going to look like in the next 30, 40, 65 days? And here we are.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So we've gone through this period where we've, been forced to stay at home to keep, both ourselves, our families, and our clients safe. And, now we've adapted to the new normal. But, have you seen any real impact on values? Obviously, there's an impact on process, but is there any real impact on values in your market locally there? Or is it really just kind of like, connecting the dots and not really impacted so much?
Yeah, I think at first, Josh, buyers still think that it's heavily impacted our market and that our market is going down 20% in the next 3 months. So it's trying to educate those buyers that that's really not happening, and just showing them, the data that we have seen over the course of 60 days of like, look, we're not seeing this. We're not even seeing this. We're seeing kind of this. And, we've seen, like in Bellevue, if you look at last April 2019 to this April 2019, I mean, we're still seeing like 10% appreciation. And then Seattle, we're seeing like 7% appreciation. The downside of it is yeah.
And
it's just,
I'm sorry. And what time is that? What time period? Like when you say 6 or 7 or 8%?
Well, I'm looking at from April 2019 to April 2020. We're seeing prices go between 5 and 10%.
So you're saying year over year?
Yeah. We're still seeing tremendous growth. It's just hard to sometimes educate. I mean, sellers obviously always want to maximize top dollar and want more. It's the buyers that come in and go, no, the market. I mean, we've been watching the news. National media talks about how the housing market's crashing, and everything's kind of in a bubble depending on where you're located at. And because of where we're located at and all the strong infrastructure we have with jobs like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, I mean, they're all still working.
Yeah. So all these companies are working. Obviously, the corporate office structure and culture needs to adapt a little bit too, because, before this, engineers at companies like Amazon and, Microsoft, of course, I think even Costco, which is headquartered around there, they are, sitting elbow to elbow on these, workbenches or desks, as the case may be. And so, I mean, they're having to adapt. No longer can we sit, 6 inches to 2 feet apart. We now have to, think about, social distancing and 6 feet until this thing blows over. So how are people going to work in Seattle?
They're not. I mean, most of them seem to be working from home, which has actually had another effect on the real estate market because, a lot of these tech jobs, most of them work from home either 30% of the time to 70% of the time. So now they're working from home 100% of the time, and they're having to adjust and adapt to, like, I've got to have a house that has the right workspace for myself, my family, whether we have a nanny, an au pair, or kids that are in school that need that you still got to be homeschooled. But you're kind of on top of each other, right? So people, I think, are expanding and looking to either move a little further out and get a little bit more space. So it hasn't really been that much of an effect on us.
Huh. That's interesting. So it sounds like you have this like pull, almost like a tug of war between buyers and sellers, where you have these buyers who think that they can get over and bid things lower. The sellers aren't responding, I would assume. And you're having to educate the buyers now more than ever.
Yeah, you're having to educate the buyers more than ever. And then you're also having to still educate the sellers, because the sellers, they don't really follow the market like you and I do, right? Because, I mean, we live and breathe and eat, and I mean, everything is about the market. All they watch is, the mainstream media. And when they talk, and we all know media wants bad news because it sells advertisement space. And so when they talk about how bad the market's crashing and, everyone's losing equity. Yeah, unfortunately, there are some families and homeowners that are, but here it's not so much, because we still have an abundance amount of people coming into our area that are still buying. And what I tell buyers or sellers, or even people that are just entertaining getting into the market, is a home is an essential. It's not like a luxury. It's an essential. You have to have shelter. So whether you're going to pay your mortgage or you're going to pay your landlord's mortgage, you're going to pay something because you have to live somewhere.
Right. That's a very good point. And, we have to keep in mind that real estate is an asset, and it's one that we derive great value from, because not only does it historically appreciate slowly over time, but we're able to use it and take shelter in it and raise our families, etc. So it's really a fantastic time to be thinking about investing in it, with rates being as low as they are. Are you seeing volume pretty much the same in these the last week or two, year over year, or are you seeing it kind of down or flat? And what are you seeing with new listings?
Well, that's always been a struggle, and it's even more so now, because sellers tend to not want to put their house on the market if it's owner occupied, right? If it's vacant, they're more open to it. But sellers don't necessarily want to put it on the market because they're fearful of having, the virus getting spread through people touching, door handles or light switches or whatever. So we're still low in inventory. I mean, we're averaging about 1.4 to 1.6 months of inventory.
Wow.
And a lot of times when I explain that to clients, they don't understand what that means. And if basically the real estate gods came in and said, no one can put any more houses on the market, in a month and a half, there is nothing to sell, right?
I love that, Chase. That's a great way to articulate what absorption rate is. I'll admit to all our viewers right now that I've personally struggled with explaining what absorption rate is, but you just hit the nail right on the head. So I'd like to give you a real estate Emmy right now, just for articulating that.
I appreciate
absolutely. If the gods were to say you can't list any more houses, this is how many months at the current pace, the current inventory level would take in order to be absorbed.
Well, I think a lot of agents struggle with that, because I would sit in my meetings and pretend like I knew what they were talking about, and then finally I'm like, I don't get what this means. So it is what it is, and and I'm sure you guys are experiencing that where you're at, and I'm sure a lot of places in other parts of the country are experiencing that where they're at too. But yeah, I do feel that once the floodgates open. And when I mean floodgates, like a bunch of homes come on the market, I think then buyers are going to then jump on board of like, okay, because we tend to follow the media, right? If the media goes, hey, now's, housing market's blowing up and, you can't get a house. And then everyone jumps into the market to try to buy a house. It's like, no, get in before that happens. And right now's that time to get in before it happens.
Exactly. I've been telling people for the last month or so, hey, let's ramp up your process, whether you're buying or selling, because now is the time. And, sellers are going to be a little bit more open. I'm not saying they're going to be open to bids 20% below the ask, but sellers are going to be more receptive due to this, uncertainty that we're coming out of. And, buyers can take advantage of the low rates. If you wait 2, 3, 4 months before the skies are crystal clear, and we realize that, hey, it's still a good time, then we're going to be right headlong into the election cycle. And, it's anyone's guess as to how that's going to affect the market. But, if history is any indication, Chase, I don't think it's going to be good. And then it's going to be the first quarter of 21 before we're really able to get any sense of clarity and how things are shaping up, whether it be, the Trump administration, the Biden administration, who's going to be the vice president, where a stock market's going to be, what's happening to the SALT deduction, which is the state and local tax deduction, which has really impacted New York State and New York City specifically. We see, people being more open to claiming primary residence outside of New York City, which was already having an impact before COVID and the pandemic. So there are a lot of variables here that we're dealing with over the next 6 months. That's why the next 3 to 4 months are really a unique opportunity for anyone who's thinking about doing anything real estate wise.
Oh, and like, we had talked about earlier before we jumped on this call, is because everyone follows the trend, everyone's waiting for the media to just say how great this market is. And I don't want people to miss out on these perfect opportunities right now, because you're still going to get into, you still potentially can get into bidding wars, right? And agents typically know what's happening in the market sooner than when the media starts talking about what's happening in the market. And you just got to listen to your broker.
Yeah, I mean, a good agent is really somebody who is out there, both literally and figuratively, talking to each other, not just themselves, but talking to each other. There's been a lot of talking to ourselves during this pandemic, right? And it's that inner voice telling us what to believe. But the more that we participate in conversations with other professionals in our community, the more likely it is that we'll actually be able to get tapped into not only what's happening in our local market, but our national market, which has been so great about these conversations that I've been having with people like you and others in our community, because I'm able to keep tabs on what the reality is, what's happening in Orange County, what's happening in Florida, what's happening in Texas, Chicago, with you in Seattle and the surrounding metro area. And it's really interesting because we see activity in these markets, whereas maybe there's not as much activity in our market. So it's important to know that there is life after this.
Right. Yeah. And I'm sure you're going to be having these conversations soon with some of your sellers that are asking you, hey, Josh, I want to get out of town and maybe move to Florida or Chicago or Orange County or Seattle. And the fact that you have these relationships with other brokers out there that you can say, well, I just talked to a colleague of mine who, kind of informed me of what's happening in their market. I'm happy to put you in contact with. So I think that's an awesome asset that you provide to your sellers.
Yeah, absolutely. Chase, tell us a little bit about kind of how you got into the business, because we're all sort of interesting people. None of us really grew up being 10 years old dreaming of what we wanted to do, and most kids are thinking about being pilots or fashion designers or screenwriters, and not many of us actually said, hey, I want to be a real estate broker. So tell us a little bit about your sort of your entrance into the business.
Yeah. So in 2001 timeframe, I was doing mortgages, and I love doing mortgages. I just didn't like sitting behind a desk and never really getting to interact with people face to face. And I really admired kind of the home purchasing process, and I decided that maybe real estate would be something I would enjoy doing. So I went and got my license, but I did it more as an investor. So it was really to buy my very first place. I wanted to understand, like, how does this process work? So I went and got my real estate license, but I didn't sell real estate. I just had my license so I could buy my first property. And then in 2005 or three, I think it was, I got into the wholesale mortgage business, which is basically going around and selling papers to mortgage brokers. And that crashed in obviously 2008 and pretty much lost everything. And I went home in Seattle and I was watching, it was Obama doing the State of the Union. And he made some comment. I love watching the State of the Union of just kind of getting a pulse on what's happening. And he made some comment of like, hey, the market's changed. Like, what I heard was, the market's changed. Quit feeling sorry for yourself. Go find something that you're passionate about and do it. And I sat and thought about it. And I realized, you know what? I always was passionate about real estate. Now, this was in 2010. So the market was still nothing sexy about it, right? It was bank-owned property, short sales.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, it can't be like this forever. So if I'm going to do it, I'd rather get into it here, right, than get into it here. So I went and got my real estate license, and then I basically just went and knocked on doors and met with probably a handful of brokers and decided who I wanted to hang my license with. And that's how I got into it. And here I am today on the Josh Rubin Show.
Welcome to the Rubin Special.
Thank you.
We serve it up lovely. So Chase, after your sort of entree to the business, your introduction, sort of 2010 when you got into it, tell us about your career trajectory and what's led you to the success that you've had. Especially the last few years, your business is kind of going parabolic to some degree.
Yeah. So right when I first got into the business, I got a call from a Zillow salesperson and started talking about Zillow, right? And I was like, yeah, I knew what Zillow was. It was, kind of a quasi of you figuring out what your house is worth. And we started talking about marketing, and I thought, well, you know what? I'll try it. I mean, everyone's on the internet, so why not try it? And I got into Zillow. Zillow was like my first platform of advertising. And they said, hey, because I said, hey, I'm thinking about getting a business coach. This is before I even know who Tom Ferry was. I was like, I'm gonna get a business coach. And I met with this guy this business coach who came to my office, and he just didn't wow me. And I told my Zillow rep this, and they go, "Hey, Tom Ferry is going to be in Bellevue. Why don't you go see this guy?" So I was like, "All right, I don't know who this guy is." And I listened to Tom speak, and it was right before he had back surgery. And we chatted for a little bit, and then he's like, "You know what? Just commit to doing this. I promise you, just commit. If you commit and you do the work, you will be successful." And I thought, what the hell? I had a little bit of money set aside for advertising, and I just invested it in myself, which is what I did with Tom. And meeting people like you and other awesome people across the country, I got a network with just top-minded people, and it just really helped me understand how to build a business. And honestly, I don't think I'd be where I am today if I didn't have kind of like that ecosystem of support, of like seeing people like you and other people, of like what they're doing, how they're doing it. Because think about, I mean, we go to our office and it's like, that's all we know is just what's at our office. And I just wasn't that impressed. I mean, there was great agents at my office, but then when I got to meet other people, I'm like, holy smokes, these guys got their stuff together. And then I just started kind of going through the playbook and masterminding, and not everything works for everybody. So I built a team up. I think I had 10 people at one time on a team. We were doing about 200 transactions, and I actually wasn't enjoying it, because what I wasn't enjoying is I wasn't really selling real estate. I was like a manager, which was fun, but I loved the deal. I loved just negotiating the deal. I loved being part of the deal, and that went away. So I scaled back, kind of restructured, built a little bit more of a boutique team, which is where I'm at right now. And I've really enjoyed this space. And just
so you got back into production. You
got back into production
and building your team. You were actually giving those opportunities to run with the ball to the members of your team, and took yourself out of production, and you were more sort of a manager within an office. I presume, like, you didn't have your own office, right?
No, we didn't have our own brokerage, but it's like being a broker inside of a broker. So I was just running.
You're sort of a brand within the brokerage,
right.
and you missed production. So what did you do? You said, "Hey, you know what? I'm not really loving this setup." So you paired the team back to your key players, I assume. You got back into production, and that's where you are today.
Yep. And I love the space that I'm in, because it honestly, what it comes down to is I just really enjoy meeting new people that come to the area, and then they don't know people. They don't know what to do. Like today, I'm going golfing with a client of mine who, I've known for about a year and a half, and he just said, "Hey, let's go play a round of golf." And so, like, I've met probably 25 new friends just because I sell real estate.
Yeah.
And I need to figure out a way to make friends.
It's amazing how our real estate business really does take sort of front and center attention in our lives, and like you, a lot of my good friends have started as clients and now built into some of my closer friends. In fact, one of them, believe it or not, one of them is actually in my will. So
no way.
Yeah. Okay. So Gino, thank you very much for taking on that role. I appreciate it. But it's interesting how many people we get to meet on a day-to-day basis, and I mean, it's just remarkable. In fact, there was one time that I was in my office wondering where my next deal was going to come from, and my phone rings, and my assistant tells me who's on the phone, and it happens to be this executive who I've admired from afar for most of my adult life, and he had received a postcard from me, and so I stood up and stood out of my chair, and I said, "Mr. Smith, I've been expecting your call." I didn't say, "This is Josh." I didn't say, "How can I help you?" I just said, "Chase, I've been expecting your call," because I had literally admired this guy for 20 years, and now he is calling me on a postcard. And I went down, I met him and his wife, I got his listing, and I sold it. And now he's on the phone with me just in the last month saying, "Hey, is it time to sell my next apartment?" So it's really incredible, just the number of people and the variety of people that we meet. We meet everybody from the kid coming out of school looking for a studio rental or something to share with his buddies or her buddies, and to the retiring executive of a Fortune 100 company, and literally everyone in between. So it's pretty incredible.
Well, and you get to see people's financial growth too. I mean, you sell a house 10 years ago, And, now let's say that's doubling in Seattle, and you're watching them, and time goes by obviously so fast. So you kind of lose sight of, like, when they reach out to you and you're like, oh my gosh, it's already been 10 years. And now you're going to take all that equity and you're buying something. Like, you're really excited and happy that you helped create that wealth for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And obviously in Manhattan, it's like 10 times what it is here. So you're seeing like 10 times the wealth.
Yeah. It's all pretty remarkable. In fact, we have a closing tomorrow with a client of ours. We're on our 6th transaction. I met her selling her first apartment on West End Avenue on the Upper West Side. It was a small little 1-bedroom facing an air shaft. We sold it for, I think, like $450,000. She took that and a little bit of a gift from her family, and she bought a 1-bedroom in Williamsburg in a new development. And then a couple years later, we sold that, bought a 2-bedroom down the street, sold that, moved her into a house in Bushwick, which is turning into a very trendy neighborhood in the last few years. And now she's selling that. And, 6 transactions later, and, we're her go-to people. So
Right.
these are the things that can happen if we just take care of our clients. We treat them like family and we stay in touch with them, which is really, a key to success in our business, is to really be sure to stay in touch with people. And we really need to reach out to, our past clients every 2 to 3 months, because as Tom said a few years ago at one of the summit events in Las Vegas, this is the one where, I don't know if you were there, but David Goggins spoke. And Tom said, if you're not calling your past clients every 2 to 3 months, someone else is.
That's right.
That really struck a chord with me. So ever since then, I've really, taken it upon myself to really keep in touch with people as much as possible.
Well, and you have to right now too. I mean, especially when people are wondering what's happening with their equity in their house, right? Because people have that concern of, am I losing my wealth right now? And, we have to educate them and just show them the data. I just love how data driven we can be with just showing them the analytics of, okay, here's where you bought, here's where the market is today, right? I mean, you're going to have, just like the stock market, you're going to have peaks and valleys, and we just can't panic over it. And at the end of the day, whether you decide to sell and rent, you still have to pay something to live somewhere. So it might as well be your own place.
It's a great point, and really focusing on the data rather than the headlines is what is going to be able to get us through this, and, be based in reality, because we really need to kind of keep in mind that, what we see on the TV, on CNBC or CNN or whatever your choice of news networks is, or, opening up the newspaper, the Wall Street Journal, as you pointed out earlier, Chase, the media is focused on one thing, and that's revenue. And how do they drive revenue? They sell advertising space. In order to sell advertising space, they have to attract viewers like us to it. And how do they do that? Sensationalism, right? So they need to play up the negative. They need to play up, all the scary things that are happening in today's society. When if we focus on the data will actually enable us to be much more positive and, forward thinking in what we're actually doing, and enable us to make progress, because progress, after all, is what we really crave. Do we really want to be set in our, thoughts of fear and not leave the house and stay under the covers all day? Or do we want to get out there and get at it and actually, figure out what's going on and how we're going to move forward?
Yeah. I mean, at some point, you just got to turn the media off or the news off and just, stop taking it in, because what I realize is it just creates more anxiety for myself, right? Then it creates more anxiety for my family, for my kids. But if I just tune it out, I mean, not ignore it, we can't ignore it, but if we just tune it out and just decide what we want to take in and what we don't want to take in. Like, one of the rules we had in our house is we don't watch anything, no news after like 7 o'clock. We only watch it in the morning time, because then you got all day to kind of go through it, right?
Right.
And we had talked about this. Media gets your attention by scaring you. I'm not saying ignore it, but it's the clickbait, right? If they talk about the good stuff, you're just gonna be like, whatever, it's good stuff, I'm not gonna read it. But if it's bad stuff, it's like, oh man, I better see what's going on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And, if it's catastrophic, you're going to know about it instantaneously. But if
Right.
it's something that's just selling newspapers, they're going to, lead you to believe one thing when in reality, the facts can be much different. So, the other day, a client called me up and said, hey, I see on CNBC that they're reporting that things are off 20%, and that brokers in the city think that the market is falling from the sky, and we should really negotiate this contract on this purchase that I'm scheduled to close on in the next couple of weeks. And I said, well, that doesn't sound like reality. It doesn't sound fact based. I said, let me go in, check the data, and I'll come back to you. Just give me 10 minutes. So I went into our database and I found that the things that CNBC was saying were totally inaccurate, and that there had been, many more transactions of far greater value than Robert Frank was reporting to the entire United States on CNBC. So, if we're going to be reporting, let's report the reality. We can report the reality of, what we're experiencing individually. We can report the reality of what our colleagues are telling us nationally. But, let's focus on the reality. And the reality is that the Federal Reserve stepped in such a way that it was a record level stimulus. And they did so within 2 weeks. How did they do that? Well, they did it because there was already a playbook from 2008 that took them 6 months to figure out how to issue the TARP rescue plan, because it was September to January by the time they started to develop the plan. And then, of course, in January, February, and then it wasn't until the end of February when it was finally rolled out officially, and stock market didn't bounce until the first week of March of 2009, Chase. So no wonder we were in the position we were in then. The entire United States was brought to its knees. Now we see a Federal Reserve stimulus plan that was rolled out in 2 weeks. Thank you to Jerome Powell and Donald Trump and Congress for working in conjunction, bipartisan, with each other to roll it out. We got it done, and people are already getting their, Paycheck Protection Program assistance. A friend of mine who applied for an SBA loan got funded today. Congratulations, Peter. At the end of the day, though, Chase, we really need to focus on how we're going to get through this, rather than, hey, if I sold my house in, on March 15th when the markets were absolutely puking, what would it be worth? Well, I wouldn't recommend that you put your house on the market. In fact, that executive that I said that called me up after 20 years of admiring him, what did he do? He called me up in April, early April, and he said, hey, is now the time to sell my house? And I said, absolutely not, Mr. Smith. I said, wait. I said, let's get to June 1st, and then we can list it. And so I called him up a couple weeks ago, and I said, hey, now's the time when we're ramping up the marketing. And so that's exactly what we're doing. He and his wife are coming back to town. We're going to talk about staging. It's a very prominent property in one of the top neighborhoods in the city. So we're going to list it. We're going to give it the old college try. 3 to 4 months before the election, we're going to try to get these places sold.
Well, I'm sure you'll be very successful at selling it, Josh.
We'll see. I mean, we need the support of the market, but I got to tell you, I'm probably the most optimistic person in the city. Why? Because it's New York City, Chase, and New York City always comes back. I mean, the Yankees sucked in the early 90s. Throughout the 80s, the 90s, the Yankees sucked. What did they do? They came back with, Derek Jeter, Scott Brocious. I mean,
Bernie Williams.
Martinez, Bernie Williams. I mean, what an incredible team they had in, 96 through, really 2003, I think it was. I mean, they created this dynasty, right? It's New York City. It'll always come back. Guess what? Even the New York Knicks will be back. I guarantee it. So, Chase, I got to tell you, I'm pumped for this reopening that's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. We're looking forward to it. We're starting to do deals. I listed something last Saturday. We already have an accepted offer to 100% of our asking price. So who are we kidding that the market is off 20%? The market is not off 20%. We're going to see a peak-to-peak connection, and people are going to say, shit, I wish I was out there in February, March, and April picking through the stuff that was available, because I could have gotten that for a discount, and now I have to pay market for it. So the days of the wholesale opportunity are behind us. Let's focus on the summer.
But I think the buyers want to still believe that they can get that 20% off below market value. And when you try to educate them, they almost want to push back a little bit of saying, no, we think the market's going to go down, which it's clearly not. It's not happening. So talk to your local realtor, whoever's watching this throughout the country, because they have the data. It's all there. It's there. You just have to believe what you're hearing. Don't watch the national news, because that's not working.
No, definitely not. It's up to us to educate our clients. And, we have to have an open mind and a positive mindset, and we'll be able to adapt to the market. So, look, at the end of the day, I think we're going to do well. And, one thing is for sure, over my 25 years of doing this, Chase, all these buyers who are sitting on the sidelines waiting for the market to pull back, what do? They end up missing the opportunity and paying more than they had to if they had just stepped up, taken advantage of historically low rates, and focused on the long term.
Yeah. Yep. I would agree.
So with that, Chase Costello in Seattle and Bellevue, Washington, thanks so much for joining us today on the Rubin Special, live on Instagram and Facebook. If you haven't followed us, do so today. Rubin Team on Facebook and Josh Sells NY on Instagram. Thanks, Chase.
See you guys.